Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Mark Fuller from the Portico product team, and thank you so much for joining us. This is the second in our series of webinars on the impacts of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act on financial aid and compliance. We call it the OBBA or BBBA bill, or OB3 for short, just to make it a little bit faster so we're not here all day. We'll focus on the latest updates on OB3, especially as they relate to changes in aid eligibility. I'll welcome my expert colleagues to the stage in a moment, but first I just wanted to remind everyone that Portico has created a resource hub for everything OB3 with details, tips, blogs, information that we're adding every week or every couple of weeks. Let's bring on our hosts for today. These are some of our guests from Portico's large and experienced financial aid team of experts. I'm sure many of you already know Sarah and Rosha and Nan, but just for those who may not, I would like to, let's do a quick round of introductions. Maybe you can say your name, maybe your role, and a little bit of background. Sarah, do you want to start maybe?
Sure. Welcome, everybody. I am Sarah Scott, the financial aid trainer here at Portico. I have been in the FA industry for 25, what feels like very long years, with the majority of that time spent on packaging as well as compliance monitoring.
Thank you, everybody. Welcome. My name is Rosha Harrison, and I am the Senior Financial Aid Director here at Portico. I have a little over 24 years of experience in financial aid. So welcome, everybody. I'm glad you're here to hear about OB3.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nan Murray. I'm Portico's Financial Aid Product Manager. I have this year makes 11 years in financial aid, and I'm happy to be working and telling you about OB3 once again.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us here today. Without further ado, Sarah, do you want to maybe kick us off and tell us a little bit about what we'll be covering?
Absolutely. Thanks, Mark. So before we jump into today's topics, I really just want to set the stage with what we're going to be covering. So first, we're going to talk about those Pell and loan changes that are being changed in relation to the OB3 regulations. And then in section 4, we're going to talk about grandfathering. What is it? Who qualifies for these provisions? Sections 5 and 6, we're going to touch on what we can expect from the FSA partner sites, such as COD, NSLDS, FVP, and then finally, the importance of collaboration between the FA and the academic offices at your institution. One important note we wanted to bring out right now was that negotiating rulemaking is still in progress. Most of you already know that. We're all waiting anxiously for those final rules, and those may shift before the June 1st expectation. So of course, we're going to share what we know, but then some details may continue to evolve. Take it away, Rosha.
All right, let's dive into Pell versus non-federal aid and the new policy surrounding Pell. Starting with these changes take effect, everything we're discussing here applies beginning in the 26-27 award year. From that point forward, schools will need to compare a student's cost of attendance to the total amount of non-federal aid they're receiving. If the student's non-federal aid is equal to or greater than the COA, the student is not Pell eligible. That is a major shift. Historically, Pell has functioned as an entitlement. If a student was eligible to receive it, regardless of any other aid, now OB3 changes that. However, if a student's non-federal aid is below the cost of attendance, they remain Pell eligible. Nothing needs to be reduced or recalculated on either side. A few important clarifications. Non-federal aid does not include VA benefits. Those are explicitly excluded. FSA will provide a full official list, what counts as non-federal aid, before July 1st. Now the timing. of when the school learns about the federal aid is absolutely critical. If the school becomes aware of the outside aid before the final Pell disbursement, then the school must compare the amounts and remove Pell if necessary. But if the school doesn't find out about the outside aid until after the Pell has already been fully dispersed, then nothing changes. The student keeps both the Pell Grant and the non-federal aid, even if the combined amounts exceeds the COA. Finally, if a student's non-federal aid does exceed the COA, schools can work with the aid source to determine whether that cannot be reduced below the COA, which would restore full Pell eligibility. Sarah's going to cover the loan limits next.
Thanks, Rosha. Okay, everybody, buckle up. This is where things really start to get pretty dicey in the financial aid show. So these are the new loan limits that go into effect for new students starting July 1st. Of course, this is a chart that shows a side-by-side comparison. Many of us have seen this chart before. It covers the annual and aggregate limits both before OB3 as well as after OB3. We're just going to focus on those last two columns. So here we can see undergrads, the annual and aggregate limits of sub and unsub were not touched at all. We will talk about how the change to Parent Plus will affect them just in a moment. But where things get really interesting is for graduate and professional students. We now must treat these programs in distinctly different ways when we're looking at an annual and ag limit. So our future doctors, dentists, lawyers, and any other specific SIP-driven professional program that Ed has defined, they'll now get $50,000 per academic year and $200,000 as the aggregate cap. One important thing that we do want to point out is that these new aggregate limits for grad and professional students, they don't include undergraduate borrowing. Therefore, an undergraduate student that is now a graduate student and they've never borrowed as a professional student, they have a combined ag limit of $157,500. So that's higher than the current aggregate limits that we're dealing with right now of $138,500. And the same applies for the professional students. $257,500 is the aggregate limit as a professional student with other undergraduate borrowing in the past. So this is the ag limit as well as that lifetime cap that we're dealing with now with OB3. So we're going to talk more on that next. So what do these changes really feel like for your graduate and your professional borrowers? Graduate students do see an increase in their ag limit. Sounds great until they realize that Grad Plus is now gone. It's like getting a small raise the same day your rent goes up. So professional students also have a higher annual and ag limit. That again still feels like a win, but they're still losing that Grad Plus. So that gap filling safety net that they had in the past, that's really vanished. So students who relied on that plus, they now will need to explore alternative options like private loans and payment plans, things like that. There's also another really big takeaway for loan limits. Rosha?
Yes, remember now we now have lifetime borrowing limits for sub and unsub borrowers that could count old loans even if they were repaid. So unfortunately, you cannot offset your prior borrowing history by paying them down and then later borrow at the same time again. This is a major shift from our prior policy.
Yeah,
Sarah?
that's a big deal right there. So let's
Yes.
talk more about undergraduate students. So again, they are seeing no change to sub and unsub. They are the calm of the storm here. But Parent Plus, that is a whole different beast now. It's now got a cap. It's capped at $20,000 per academic year and then $65,000 lifetime limit per student. So the days of Parent Plus being able to cover everything up to COA, those are over with now. These limits are per student again. So mom and dad can't each borrow $20,000 in the academic year. It's $20,000 per student. So Rasha, here's a question we've been fielding. Can a dependent student receive additional unsub after they have reached these annual or aggregate limit caps?
That's a big one. One additional change on that is additional unsubsidized loan will not close the gap. Once a Parent Plus is maxed out, the only way they can receive additional unsub is if the parent was denied or you complete a PJ override. That safety waive is now gone. Valve is not gone. So families who used to rely on that workaround will now need to rethink their strategy. Sarah?
Yep. So we're going to switch now to some other factors here, such as the less than full-time reductions, as well as those institutional limits. But first, let's talk about the less than full-time reductions. This is really one of the most operationally impactful changes that we're going to deal with in the financial aid sector coming up in OB3, because it will be implemented across all direct loans except Parent Plus. So this includes even loans that fall under the legacy provisions, such as Grad Plus. We're going to cover a little bit more on that later in the presentation, but that's a big piece right there. FSA has provided a 5-step framework that we can use. It is being implemented into the product FA core solution.
Now, let's put these steps into 2 simple packaging scenarios.
All right, so let's talk about sample number 1. This is where we really remember that math is still part of our job as FAAs. So we're just going to briefly bounce through this. This is a first-year dependent undergraduate student. So we all know the annual limits, $3,500 sub and $2,000 on sub. The enrollment intensity for each term is 125% for fall and then 75% for spring. Now, you might be wondering, why is the fall loan disbursement still only at 1,750 sub and 1,000 unsub if their intensity is 125%? But the reality is that there is a cap for that fall term. It limits what fall can receive to no more than 50% of the annual limit. So fall has to stay at 1,750 sub and then 1,000 unsub. That extra intensity doesn't let us exceed that cap. Instead, it shifts it to the spring term. So then in spring, they receive that remaining half of the annual limit, 1,750 sub, as well as 1,000 unsub. So the result is symmetrical by term, fall and spring, despite those different intensities because of that first term ceiling. So this approach, as well as the next sample that Rosha is going to talk about in a moment, are from the NASFA Ask Regs interpretation. Many schools are adopting this while we do await those final federal provisions that we are all awaiting from FSA.
All right, so the example number 2 is now giving you an illustration of a student taking 9 credits in the fall with the expected of 15 credits in the spring. 24 credits is considered full-time for the academic year. Please note these intensities are rounded to the whole number when necessary. So step 1, your annual loan limit would be considered 3,500 sub and 2,000 unsub for a dependent student at a grade level 1. Your second step, you're going to divide the 24 by 24, which is 100% for the year. Next step is your 2 terms, 50% academic year loan limit per term. So you're going to take the next step would be to calculate the first term, which is the fall, 9 divided by your 12 times 100 equals 75%. And then the next step would be your next term, spring, which would be 15 over 12 times 100 is 125% in spring. You're going to consider your full annual loan limit, which is 5,500. 35 sub and 2,000 unsub. The maximum 50% of the annual loan limit per term. Step 5, you're going to break down your calculation again. 1,750 times 75% equals 1,313 for the fall sub. You're going to do the same thing with your unsub times 75%. You're going to get 750 fall and unsub. Then you're going to take the spring. Do the same calculation, same logic applies, times 125%, and you're going to get 2187 for the spring, and then 1250 for the spring unsub. Students cannot receive more than 50% of their annual loan limit in the first term of the academic year. Because the student's enrollment is at 125% for the second term in this scenario, the student can receive more than 50% of their annual loan limit in that term. And as Sarah mentioned, this is coming from the NASFA Ask a Reg reference. And this approach will be given more additional clarification from our FSA. Sarah?
Thank you, Rosha. So now let's talk about those institutional loan limits that can be set. So this is a new authority that Ed has given the institutions to set a lower than the federal maximum for specific programs or majors. This can be a really effective tool for aligning borrowers with the expected cost or the outcomes of a program. And this is really, again, the first time that they've ever given us the ability to say, nope, you may not borrow the maximum amount. But as always, with great power comes great responsibility. Rosha, can you fill us in on the guardrails of this policy?
Sure. So the first guardrail that we want to consider, if you set a program-specific cap, it has to apply to every student in that program, no one-offs. The exception would be on a case-by-case adjustment. Second, students should know exactly what that limit is and how it is applied, not buried in your fine print or tucked inside a policy manual nobody reads. Thirdly, if your school adopts a lower limits, students need to hear it from you, directly from you, when you're doing your one-on-one student counseling with them, directly, not discover it only when the award letter / funding estimate for using Portico looks smaller than they expected. And finally, once your school sets a reduced limit for a program, a PJ cannot override it. So I really want to stress that. You cannot submit a PJ to override that. So it's important to be thoughtful up front, make all of those assessments up front, and choose limits that make sense for both the program and for your student population.
Yeah, so in short, this new flexibility can be helpful, but it does come with this real responsibility. So it's really important and worth collaborating with your academics team as well as leadership to ensure that any limits that you are setting are intentional, they're transparent, they're consistently applied. That's a really important factor for this regulation. So this is really important to get nailed down. Of course, you can take this information back to your academics and leadership and FA teams to start thinking through this. It's not required that you do this, but it is an authority that we now have, and it could be to the benefit of your students to keep them out of difficulties down the road. So let's go into the legacy provisions and what is involved with that. Sometimes we call this grandfathering. If you are on the last webinar, Armando called it the Abuelo rules, I should say. So this is part of the OB3 that lets certain borrowers temporarily continue under those pre-OB3 rules, but only for a very specific time frame and for conditions. So we're seeing a yes/no side here. There are conditions that you can allow these regulations to continue. For example, Grad Plus, they can continue receiving Grad Plus if they're eligible for legacy. Parent Plus, those will not have a cap like they will with OB3 if they're qualifying for legacy. Grad and professional loan limits, those can stay at those old annual and aggregate caps. And importantly, there will be no lifetime federal cap under those legacy rules. Again, only if they meet those legacy rules. So for students that do meet this, that old structure that we're all familiar with, that will stay in place for a limited time for these particular policies. But let's talk about what policies are not affected by legacy. These are really important to take away with you because it can be confusing. You think everything can be legacied, but that's not the case. The less than full-time reductions, the loan reductions we talked about earlier, those will still apply regardless of any legacy status for the student. You must reduce those loans based on their enrollment intensities, as well as the non-federal aid versus COA Pell eligibility rules that Rosha talked about at the beginning. Those will still apply regardless of legacy statuses, as well as, excuse me, as well as those institutionally set limits. Your school can decide to set those limits regardless of legacy borrowing. So legacy does help with those really big ticket items, but it doesn't erase all the new OB3 rules. So what we really need to take away from here is that this grandfathering, sorry for the pause, guys, the grandfathering, it's not a blanket exemption. It's more like just a temporary extension of a few of those key pre-OB3 benefits. We're going to dive into on the next slide who actually qualifies, because as you might guess, not everyone does qualify. Rosha, you want to tell us about it?
Sure. So here are our key requirements under the legacy status under OB3. The student must stay continuously enrolled in the same degree type program through June 30th, with no withdrawals, no transfer. A change in undergrad major within the same degree type is fine. Next, they must have received at least one direct loan disbursement for this program before July 2026. Undergrad loans can be dispersed up to 10 days early for this purpose. Graduate and professional loans cannot. Eligible students remain under pre-OB3 rules for up to 3 academic years of their expected time to credential complete, which is shorter. Expected time is basically strict on the program length minus your credits earned. No adjustments, again, no adjustments for LOAs, part-time status, or even retakes. Withdrawal, transfer, or change in a degree type removes eligibility immediately and permanently. However, an improved LOA, a school closure, or a change in institution affiliation does not cause a loss. A change in term structure does cause a loss.
So we can see that this is another very impactful policy here as far as whether or not they qualify for legacy. FSA has said that there will be a flag for these legacy borrowers in COD, but ultimately they've stated that it is up to the institution to ensure that these rules are being applied correctly. So the big question a lot of schools are already asking is, so what happens after that legacy period ends? And honestly, the answer is once the grandfathering window closes, that student becomes fully subject to all the OB3 regulations. And whether they have anything remaining after they close that window will really depend on how far they are into the program at that moment in time. So that's really one of the reasons strong advising between the FA office, the academics office with the student will really be essential, because students need to understand that their legacy clock, that doesn't pause, even if their enrollment intensity goes down or if they go on an approved LOA. That legacy clock will not change based on any of those types of adjustments. All right, Nan, let's try it again. She's our product Dalai Lama. She has promised, I hope she doesn't go back on me, but she has promised to share a little detail in relation to the FSA system readiness.
The system isn't going to be ready, it's already ready. So now are we polishing? Yes, and we're aligning any sort of any late break news and tweaks. Yes, we're also aligning with that. But from a system standpoint, we're not sitting around and waiting on April 26th like a grand opening and ribbon cutting. We're just building, we've been building against this for months. So remember that we've received 26, 27 ICERs since October, right? So this isn't theory for us. This is already in motion. So what really happens when we're at April 26th, right? So this is activation. That is when the new flags start showing up, new edits start firing, and new logic starts. And it's going to be doing what it's supposed to do already in the system. That's when the system is going to say, we know what's coming, and okay, now it's live. Let's see how it behaves in the wild. Let's get right to it. On April 26th is where the policy becomes transactional. Up until now, it's been guidance, announcements, here's what's coming. But after April 26th, its records are coming in differently, right? A little bit of hint there. We had from the simplification, we all had that in the system, but now we also have versions of 1 and 2 coming directly for 26, 27, because we started getting the FAFSAs back in October. So that's our version 1. And now we have updates that are coming in. So now they're version 2, and the system has been made ready for that, right? Records are coming in differently. Edits are actually triggering. School needing to make real decisions in real time. The system is now here to support you. And in our next week, we're going to actually start showing you parts of the system that they're totally new, that you're going to now be interacting with, that's going to help you with dealing with all of that. For FSA processing systems, there are new players in the mix. There's workforce Pell eligibility flag, and on paper, it sounds simple. Hey, this student is eligible for Pell through a workforce program, even if it normally wouldn't be. Cool, love that. But here's where it gets real. The flag can override traditional Pell ineligibility, like your prior bachelor degree. Schools are now responsible for setting and unsetting that flag. And yes, if student situation change, you'll have to go back and clean it up. So it's not just informational. This is institutional accountability baked into the system. Behind the scenes, we have the updated C code flags. We've modified the loan limit indicators tied to OB3. The core system logic isn't just evaluating eligibility, it's interpreting the new dimensions of the eligibility as discussed by Sarah and also Rosha. For C codes, that's where things, of course, are getting a bit interesting, because now it's where good intentions can accidentally turn into audit findings if you're not careful. So there are new warning edits tied to workforce Pell. The translation of that is, hey, just because a flag exists doesn't mean you should actually automatically pay Pell. And our system is going to be able to differentiate between those nuances. The grandfathering logic, we've already taken care of that. And we'll show you the indicators in the system that will tell you whether or not a student is grandfathered, right? And as well, when it's ending, those indicators and having to do those formulations are currently in the system. So there's no need to make manual adjustments when we've taken care of the edge cases and nuances in core. NSLDS is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Quietly but critically, we've had new matches for the lifetime limits, Parents Plus, the ICER changes, new limits, updated grade levels, new post-screening reasons. We are, of course, included, and by the time we go live, we'll have FAH changes in our system that we use to support all of our schools in getting loan history. That information has just been tweaked. So once again, we are adjusting to those tweaks and polishing the system so that when we go live, it will all be ready to go. But here's what's going to be seen and talked about the next time, right? In our system, because flags one thing, edits is one thing, file uploads is another thing. But what this has translated in core into is packaging decisions, loan limit calculations, user workflows, exception handling. When we talk about readiness, we're not catching up. We've already been processing ICERs. We've already built supports for version 1 and 2 transactions, already implemented institutional loan limit logics, and we're putting the final touches on things like proration handling. So you can be confident that core is ready to handle all of these changes, because here's the reality. You're not going to see the full impact of OB3 by reading announcements. You're going to see it when a record comes in and is flagged differently, when an edit stops a disbursement, when a student qualifies in one way and qualifies in a way that they wouldn't have before. And suddenly you're asking, okay, what just happened and what do I do next? That's the part we've unpacked, not just by changing, but how it actually plays outside of the system and in your everyday use. And trust me, that's where things get interesting. And you'll join me next week, pre-momentum, to be able to see that. But here for her cameo today, I have our maybe surprise guest, Siana. Take it away.
All right. Thank you, Nan. Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Siana Stewart Mullings here, COO at Portico. It's a pleasure to join this amazing team and just give some additional insights into what's happening with OB3, and more importantly, the things you should be thinking about and organizing at your school. So there are a lot of impacts that are driven by the academics team. There are some policies that will be impacted by your student accounts team. And so I want to make sure that you've all thought this through and started having these conversations on campus. So let's go through a few bullet points on things you should be thinking about. And at Momentum, as Nan mentioned, we'll be going into these a lot deeper. But if you take workforce programs as an example, as they will now qualify for Pell. However, there are things you need to do to ensure that these programs can qualify for Pell, like ensuring you have the correct state approval, you have the right accreditor approval, you have submitted these changes to the department and got these programs on your e-card. You cannot self-certify these programs. So that's a change as well. You're probably familiar with rolling out a new program and you can start offering Title IV right away because you can self-certify. These programs cannot be self-certified. So are you having those conversations with your academic department, with your compliance departments? There's also a time frame. There is a year after which the program is approved before it can be Title IV approved. So you may already have programs like these that you're teaching as cash pay today that can get approved right away, but you need to have those conversations internally. The next big thing we want to highlight for you are the legacy guidelines. And these are very student specific. So the rule says the student can be grandfathered in if they match these criteria, and I won't repeat because Sarah did a great job of going through and Rosha did as well. However, based on individual student behavior, did they go on an LOA or not? So the student could be in the same program, started the same date as another student, and they don't match and they don't qualify for the legacy provisions, but another student does. And that's driven off the fact that the legacy 3-year is expected time to complete. It's really key that you pay attention to that time frame, because if you say your program is 2 years, then you can only have 2 years legacy time frame for that program. So if the student already completed 1 year, even if they're on an LOA, it doesn't matter. They still only have an additional year time frame. So that will impact your students. And you will have a mix of students that are legacy and those that are not legacy, and they started the program at the same time at the same school. So keep those things in mind. Make sure you're already looking at identifying them and how this will impact their aid. The other thing to think about is what happens if one of my students is no longer falls into the legacy time frame in the middle of their program. So immediately their current aggregate balance changes, but it doesn't erase what they've borrowed in the past. So now you need to look at what is the remaining amount that student has. So you could potentially have a student that's in the middle of their program and they immediately lose access to aid. We're not saying that to scare you. We're saying that so that you can go back and think this through with your academic team. The less than full-time loan prorations, how are we all thinking through those? Because now you have to think about your credit balance processing. So that may be happening in your accounting department or your student accounts department, but now students could have earned aid, been packaged based on one level, disbursed based on that same level, and then dropped credits, and now you have to prorate their loans. They're no longer eligible for those amounts. You may have already issued a credit balance check, and now the student is owing you money for that payment period that you thought was fully paid. So these are concepts for you and the entire team at your school to think through. It's not just a financial aid responsibility, it's everyone's responsibility. Now, the nice thing, and Nan will showcase this next week, is that the Portico FA system will have a lot of buttons, alerts, reports, things you can use to manage your student body, but a lot of that will be reactive. It will be after the credit has changed and not before. So you need to do the legwork before those things happen. And lastly, don't want us to run out of time, but I just want to touch on the earnings measures that's coming. This will now impact all programs. So even our district schools or state schools, the nonprofit schools that are out there, you don't have your GE calculations to do, but you will have earnings measures to follow. And it will be significant. You could lose aid for programs depending on how they perform. And they're basically comparing the earnings of your graduates to high school graduates in the same career. So it's a new concept, but something that you should be talking with your compliance team about and your academics team about. So we wanted to share those insights so you can take them back, start working on them now, don't wait. And we'll, like I said, have more defined examples to showcase with you at the conference in Momentum. So thanks for your time. And with that, I'll pass it back to Mark.
All right. Thank you, Siana. Finally, just a shout out about Portico's financial aid offerings in general when it comes to financial aid, from our A to Z software platform to individual services to our full service offering for processing and beyond. So take a look at some of these options here. Reach out to us if you have any questions. We'll be happy to talk you through what we do offer. So thank you so much again for joining us here today. Hopefully this was helpful for you. Please feel free to reach out to us. So thanks so much and have a great day, everyone.